Good morning, all. Anyone listening? Everyone listening, all ears on deck. I appreciate you being here. Austin is with me, and I appreciate Austin being here. And I appreciate that we do this together as a group, regardless of where you are right now listening. You are participating. Your reactions and responses are your interactions with us. And whatever they are affecting everything that is, since everything that's happening, whenever it's happening, is happening. And if that's inclusive of what you're doing, then we are all impacted and affected by what we each do and what everyone else does. So making that a premise for this discussion makes what you're doing, allows what you're doing to be very interactive with what we're doing, whenever you're doing it. And the point of this discussion is to start looking at what we're doing in thought accurately enough to see the world in ways that it's happening rather than what we think is happening, and start to dispel the rumors that give us impressions that are depressing. And Austin and I have done a lot of work together. I appreciate him greatly. He has been innovative in his thinking and challenging, and one of the few actually that actually stands in my face and challenges me and doesn't let go until he comes to some resolution. And I appreciate that in him because it helps me develop a form of clarity or understanding that I can express things better or concede the issues that he's pointing to and start to learn to talk about them in ways that may be a little closer to accurate than the ones I was. So welcome, Austin. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to confusing a bit more people today.
Listen, don't consider when you, I mean, if we were introducing someone to, if we left someone in a room with a piece of paper and told them to come up with an answer to a calculus problem, and they never have any experience in algebra or calculus, and then brought in a book that could help them explain the solution, it wouldn't be, the book wouldn't be confusing as the impossibility of trying to solve the problem without the book. And so our conversation is basically a verbal book, an audio book on things that have been done. And I'm not suggesting I know what the answers are in all respects. I just looked at this issue with mentally obsessive thinking for a long time and want to talk about what I've seen. So the confusing part can often be just the confounding nature of starting to confront something that's accurate in relation to the confusion that we're already experiencing, and making believe is part of our nature and something that will one day resolve itself, and everyone's confused and all that kind of stuff. And the world's confusing and life is confusing, and like life is a struggle. Life is not a struggle. Life has been doing what life has been doing as long as it's been doing it, and it's doing it right now exactly as it's doing it, and it is not struggling with what it's doing. It's simply expressing the possibility of what's happening. That's it. So what I make of it is very different than what it is and what it does. And what I do is the one thing I seem to have been given some dominion over, to choose yes or no, up or down, in and out, etc., in my thinking. So that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot less confusing when you stop trying to make sense of it.
Well, if you knew something and pretended you didn't, like one of a good example of that is people saying they don't belong where they are. Right? Now, that's an easy thing to say and to think. But if they're actually where they are while they're thinking they don't belong where they are, that is a conflict in thought, not reality, not in what's happening. What's happening is they're where they are. And what they're thinking about where they are is that they're not where they are. Now, if I base my day on thinking I don't belong where I am, the chances are the actions I take, given that the premise of my thinking is mistaken and shaky, the actions I take are probably going to be shaky actions. And they're going to confirm the shakiness of the initial thought. Simply to support the contention that that thought is right and real, I create manifest circumstances to match and mirror those thoughts, to say, see, I told you, I knew it. I knew this would happen. This always happens. And not see my complicity in creating that, manifesting it. So people normally talk about only manifesting things they really want. What they miss is that we're manifesting everything we claim not to want. And
Yeah.
it's very powerful to start to realize that if we can be so ignorant of what we're actually doing, that there isn't a lot of wisdom in making believe that somehow we're only going to do it in relation to the things we really want, when we've been denying that we've been doing it all along with the things we claim we don't want, until we start turning around that basic thinking and saying we can manifest anything we want, when we realize we've been manifesting it all along in terms of our experience. And if we want something different than the experience we've been having, that can be very depressing when we make believe that what we create isn't what we create, and we create that inner conflict. It becomes a very different platform to start saying, oh, I can do anything I want. I can do anything that's possible that I want. And generally, wanting to do something that's impossible is impossible. So it's not really a want. It's just a fantasy. It's just something I can consider, but it's probably not something that's going to happen. Now, thinking things are impossible that haven't happened doesn't mean they're impossible. It just means they haven't happened. So there are things that have never happened that can certainly be realized, like peace on earth would be a good example. Seems like it can't happen because it hasn't happened, and yet it's always been here. We've just been fighting and acting as though there isn't peace on earth because we're in pretty constant conflict. 92% of written history has had us at war with somebody. And that doesn't mean that earth is in conflict. It just means we're in conflict.
I would even argue that, see, as a listener, as like a self-centered listener, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I hear that I'm just doing manifesting the wrong way. I would argue against the concept of manifestation. I think it's just I think it's high time to sort of eliminate it completely from people's dictionary and motive in life. This idea of it's such an indication of privilege and arrogance and blindness to, like what you said, what we already have. This idea that we even need to manifest is such a problematic thing that is more harmful than the possibilities that it creates of people. I mean, to me, the concept of manifestation is no different than believing that a salt lamp is going to make you a better person, or because Mercury's in retrograde. Like, it's this need to manifest abundance. I think it's just a Western thing. It's an American thing. It's a capitalist.
That isn't a problem of manifestation. That's a problem of not noticing that if we're constantly trying to manifest abundance, we're claiming that the world is scarce and that life is scarce. That's not true. If nature is abundant, which apparently nature has given us everything we've ever utilized yet so far, so it must be fairly abundant. It's a pretty good example of, we haven't been able to overuse it yet, so that there's none of it left. Somehow it keeps giving, despite the overuse and the unsustainability of some of our approaches. But that isn't a function of manifestation. That's a function, just like people coming to me and always wanting to feel better and not feel as many negative thoughts, rather than say, what is it I'm doing that's so negative that I constantly want to feel better? If I'm unwilling to have what I have where I am, there is no chance I'm going to launch in any direction that I'm going to see clearly what I'm doing when I get to that place I think I need to get or be, because I'll have just refined the ideas that I'm not where I belong the whole time. And that won't get me there, because I will always feel somehow like I don't belong, because it's been based on the whole concept that I'm not where I am, and as a result need to get somewhere else. So I don't think what you're saying is a problem of manifestation. It's kind of like manifesting an image in a mirror, right?
No, I'm speaking against. I think it's time to stop with this in our culture, and it just feels like there's this always constant need to. People are trying to find ways to manifest, and it's time to just wake up, smell the roses. Like, there's no need to manifest anything. It's such an, like I said, it's an indication of privilege and wealth, but it's just a lie. People need, every time I go to any form of AA meeting or whatever, there's always some angle of this need to manifest. Every Sunday meeting is all about someone in some form manifesting something for their own selfish benefit,
Yeah.
rather than, the best advice I ever got with regarding in being in Alcoholics Anonymous was that I thought it was a self-help program, and it's not a self-help program. It's a help others program. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't always approach it that way, but when I do, I'm certainly happier. But like I always say, like, look at the Chris Cornells, the Anthony Bourdains of the world. It's just like bullshit. The manifestation is just this bullshit term in capitalist culture to try to get people, it's an acquirement. It's a more. It's putting like a sort of spiritual flair on a very old toxic term that is just accumulation. And that's why.
So those are all thoughts.
Yeah. But when you and I started working together, my main focus was I need to get my shit together.
Yeah.
And you would tell me that is just another way of saying amalgamating your feces.
Yeah. Well, it's another form of constipation. But so the word manifest is just basically, it's perceiving, it's having things the way they are. It's seeing that a manifestation is really a reflection of what we're doing. That's all. It isn't just creating abundance and all this stuff. And that was part of the point I was making, is that if we're seeing it accurately, we're seeing that the mirror of what we see is a reflection of what we're thinking. And if we're standing in front of a mirror wearing an outfit and arguing with the mirror to take the outfit off, we're going to be there a long time, and we're not going to get much done productively. And the chances are, because we think who that is in the mirror is who we are, we're going to die of starvation trying to have that thing undress if we think that's our goal. Because the productive potential for us to manifest or produce, because production would be a manifestation of our ability to express, is in human terms part of what we're here to do, to self-sustain and self-support and have enough to give others. When sobriety talks about helping others, it doesn't say help others to ideas that are still sick. It says clean your own house. Before you do that, you got nothing to transmit. We cannot give what we do not have. And if what I have is a mess of thoughts that are at odds with me and everyone else, I'm not going to carry a message that does anything other than contaminate the message that was originally considered worth carrying.
Yeah, I think we call that trauma bonding.
Well, it's
nowadays.
Enabling too. It's enabling. It's encouraging wrong to be right in the name that what I'm doing is great because I happen to be thinking I'm generous, when in fact all I'm doing is thinking thoughts about me being abundant and generous, when in fact I'm hurting other people. That can't line up.
Yeah. Well, it's scary times. It nowadays it's like something that I thought of when you talked about how you introduced me and you said that have always kind of pushed you and confronted you to the point that I can get a satisfactory answer. Now there's like people are always like, identify as this, identify as Democrat or Republican, identify as some sort of tribe. And then that way, and they've made it, I don't want to I want to be responsible here. We all kind of make it so, well, even it's like an agree to disagree culture. And even if maybe like you can't convince me, that's okay because I identify as this tribe. I mean, nowadays no one can define what a woman is. So it's just, but maybe that kind of goes in.
I seem to be pretty good at noticing them. Listen, if what we're doing here is trying to dissect what we're doing that's insane, then we're basically just getting better at talking about insanity. And I would say that's insane. And if in fact the nature of our existence isn't divided and isn't in pieces and isn't confused and isn't insecure and isn't in doubt because it's not in question, it may be worth considering that as a premise without putting labels and identifications on it and enabling it to become something that it isn't and seen as something that we make up as a new form of story we tell and image we have and iconic something or another that we worship, but simply concede that if it is what it is what it is, or as it is right now. And that my calculation in relation to it only impacts me and everyone else on a human level. And so my productive capacity, my ability to what I would call manifest as a word just caught talking about reflecting the potential for me to realize things in the world, to, if I go to work, I tend to get something done. If I get something done, I tend to get paid. Basic, 2+2 kind of math in relation to functional capacity. If I'm basing my experience only on what I'm thinking, and I'm looping around in thought, I don't have a lot of potential to be productive in all the ways that are possible, because all I'm thinking that's possible is the impossibility of my own self-centered thinking. And the self-centered in thinking is ego. And all of a sudden, all I am is what I think. And all of a sudden, I think God is the ultimate. If the best I can do is think more about myself, then it is the self I'm thinking about that I think is God, or whatever that superior power is. And that would be a major conflict, because it would mean that humans will have acted as they pretty much have, that it's every man for himself, every woman for herself. And the best we can do is to fight each other and keep each other down and dominate nature and everyone else to prove that we're right, when in fact, right doesn't need proof at all, because it simply works in all cases whenever it's utilized and applied. Truth doesn't need my agreement to be true. Reality doesn't need me to confirm it to be true. But when I think of it in those terms as being true, regardless of what I think, I begin to actually relieve my thinking of the job of thinking it needs to get there, and allow it to start to express it in ways that I can't calculate and predict from within that limited form of thinking I've been doing, and trying to create expectations that I'll realize and be dashed in my hopes every time they're not realized, which is, in my experience, every time. Very different conversation, very different platform. My sense is we're designed to express those things, not because we can predict them and figure out how they're going to serve us and get us what we think we want, and get all the little toys and things that we think will give us the appearance of having everything, but because the fulfillment of them is our actual nature right now, as we are, where anyone is, when everything is, where everything is right now, completely full. And the only thing I'm struggling with is what I think about them, as though it's up to thinking to conclude how they are, when in fact they are as they are right now, everything, whatever that is. And it may be invisible in something I can't see, but it doesn't mean I don't experience it. And it doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact on my human ability to function and express that thing in a way that thing would be commensurate with whatever it is. If it's love, it would mean expressing love. And love isn't telling people lies to make them feel better.
I wonder if we can talk a little bit about, you mentioned we've worked together for several years. We talk about this all-encompassing truth, but I don't think we've ever what is that?
Well, thank you for the question.
Is there like a 10 commandments of Jack? Like, what is this all-seeing truth?
If there is an absolute source, if there is an infinite source, if there is anything unlimited, if there is anything omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, if that exists, and I'm not saying it does, so it's not up to me, I'm just saying if it does, it would probably be worth noting in our experience that there is something preeminent and yet present simultaneously to our experience. And that we're a product of it. We're not the creator of it, but as a product of it, when I acknowledge it and begin to recognize it and begin to know that it's already who I am in my essence, I begin to have a willingness to see a knowledge and awareness that I would not see if I was simply thinking about my thinking and thinking about myself and thinking about the self born in thought, which is ego. My experience would change. And what would that experience be? I would say fulfilling. It would allow me to see what's wrong without feeling I have to hide what's wrong and defend against what's wrong and pretend what's wrong is right because it's so hard to see. Because now I'm able to see that all I'm seeing is the same defective thinking expressing itself that I've finally come to terms with in the totality of allowing my awareness to be as total as it can possibly be, not because I'm saying affirmations and hoping people start hustling some new concept, but simply because if it's the way that it is, it's this way for everything and everyone, everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just simply something we haven't talked about accurately because we've used those terms you talked about and using words. And in the first discussion, you talked about the inability of words to define things, and trying to define things further and further and further just leads to more definition. And the more definition leads to more individuation, and individuation leads to more sense of separation and a sense of incompleteness, because there's never enough definition to be able to explain what's actually happening in all the ways that it's happening. Because all the ways that it's happening include all the ways that it's happening, everything, everywhere right now. So it isn't necessary because it's already happening. We don't need to fill the void with definitions and words. If what's happening is already happening, then that's the knowing nature of our existence. And it would be, again, I would suggest, well worth noting that if it is, it is. And the difference is, like they found in calculus, when they applied the infinite, all of a sudden it turned the choppy points and lines and curves of algebraic formulas and equations and parabolas into smooth, graceful curves. So even the scientists back then said, we're not saying there's anything infinite, but when we apply it, it works. So my take from that is that if we apply this in a concept where truth just becomes true, doesn't become an arguable quotient of my understanding of what truth means, because clearly if my understanding is limited to thoughts, it's not going to mean what truth means, because truth isn't limited to thoughts. It isn't limited. It's just true. So if I think of it in absolute terms, that truth is true and reality is reality, and I am as I am, I start to introduce to thinking a stable platform for thinking to begin to express that, rather than constantly make believe it needs to attain it and find it and get credit for it, for achieving it and seeking it and going on a journey all the time somewhere else. It's always here where we are, always.
But defining those, yeah. Well, defining those is something that I remember in anthropology class, they'd literally write out like cultural truths, and there's different like differentiating between what's a societal law and a cultural truth and stuff. But my teacher would kind of go into he was such a good teacher, Professor Zane, I can't remember, but he would kind of go into the different practices of various tribes and how to us they would seem so dramatic and just not okay in the context of our culture, but that it, and then he would explain why it made sense in the context of where they live and everything. But when you say about this sort of, and it just seems like right and wrong is kind of arbitrary. And I'll give you an example. Like I love to take advantage of Amazon. It's like obviously wrong to steal, but every now, but I love to just tell them my package didn't arrive, and I don't really care that it's illegal and that I'm stealing because it's Amazon, and I justify it because Amazon I go, oh, it's an evil corporation, whatever. I know it's wrong what I'm doing, but it's like seems like right, wrong. It's all, there's too many intertangling made up rules versus,
what's right. Well, if again, if you dive into the definition and the ability, if you try to divide 1 in half and get to 0, you will never do it. All that happens is the fraction, the decimal, gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it becomes more unwieldy as time goes on. There's no way to do it. So
it seems like right and wrong. Before I lose this thought, it seems like right and wrong is more to do with not this connection to an absolute truth, that it seems more that it's about a cost efficiency system of like, because what I've been told
It's about
like,
what works and doesn't work.
but I have come to learn that I can do anything I want. It's that I will have to pay the price. So it's more of like,
Yes.
will this, when the bill comes due for this action, whether it be right or wrong, is this something I'm willing to pay for down the line? That seems more what right and wrong is about. Not that it aligns with this like linear truth. It's more
It does
about,
though. It does though,
yeah.
because the totality of the right and wrong is that when you make a wrong move, and what is wrong is something that doesn't work, that is irresponsible, something that won't produce a result that you will be happy to have. And part of the evidence of that is thinking that the bill will come due later, when in fact the immediacy of those decisions and the consequence of those decisions are immediate. When you think the best thing to do is the wrong thing, you're thinking now wrong is right. That's the conflict of addiction right there. And the fact that humans have been thinking this way so long, we have created cultures to justify the division of ideas we've had, when all we've really ever described is choices people have made that are different than the other choices people make. And they're always changing. They're never so fixed as to think of them as permanent, because even within the tribes, they're always evolving to some degree. They may repeat general things, but in the global aspect of whatever they're doing, everything's always changing, because everything in the universe is always changing.
Mm-hmm. But what is an irresponsible action though? That's where because it seems like
one that you won't want the consequence for.
maybe that's the problem though, is a failure to admit that we really do want the consequence.
It's very good. Austin, that is a bit of brilliance right there, I will tell you, because that's a very good conclusion and not something many people tend to come up with. The fact is, we make believe we don't want what we have. We really live thinking we don't have what we want. That is a lie. Why would we live in the totality of the present moment and not have what we wanted if the choices we made that are creating the absolute consequences of those choices weren't choices we wanted to make? And I'm not suggesting that sick choices should be providing fertile results, but that sick choices produce sick consequences. And to say that I didn't make the choice to get the consequence is to say where I am is where I don't belong. And wouldn't that be a pretty good precursor to feeling like I'm disconnected and alone and don't have any place and I'm separate from everything and I have no hope? All those things would be natural consequences of that line of thinking. It isn't a consequence of reality. It's a consequence of a concept that I've created that I make believe is true, that isn't true. It's just accurate for the mistaken thinking I'm doing. So you're right. It's a not wanting to take responsibility for the consequences because we think, because we haven't gotten caught. And this was a big thing that I lived with growing up. I used to think honesty was not getting caught. So I would lie and cheat and hide and steal and do whatever I did and think that if people didn't see it, I was better. And I was really proving to them how good I was. And behind the scenes in my stomach, I knew better the whole time. I felt bad. I felt nervous. I felt anxious. I felt very conscious of everyone's glance and how they looked at me, what they said, what they're doing. Do they know what I did? Am I giving it away? All that defensiveness ended up leading to an enormous amount of anxiety that I would have then used to blame on everyone else for triggering me, when in fact the triggers were, my finger was on the trigger waiting for somebody to get near the loaded weapon that I had loaded.
The emotional effects, the anxiety, that's what you're talking about, the immediate effects.
Well, think of what those things are. That's your awareness.
Yeah.
If your awareness is preoccupied by consequences that you don't want to claim you're responsible for, you're going to feel like you're a victim to those consequences and they're happening to you rather than being created by you. If they're happening to you, there's nothing you can do about them but try to figure out how everyone else is wrong to be doing them. And that's just more wrong to the wrong that you're doing.
Well, what I'm curious about, and this is why like the stealing from Amazon is a good example, because I have no remorse for doing it. So I'm wondering, what does it mean to do something that is irresponsible, but if you don't care, or there's an apathy to it, or you just simply, or maybe you're a sociopath, maybe that's why they're so good at not being caught, is because they they don't have an emotional attachment to the actions they're doing. So I wonder, well, then what does it mean then in that case? If you don't really care, it's not what does it mean when you know it's wrong, but you do it anyways, and you'll gladly do it because you don't care. You know what I mean?
Well, you're fighting for a cause. And basically war and all the other things that humans do to kill each other is that same basic line of thinking. That the cause is worth cause is worth it, and the overall arcing issue is worth it, but it's all within the confines of some limited idea anyhow. So it's never global. It's only global to the limited ideas of a new group of people who are maintaining those ideas, and they feel bigger. People in that group might feel bigger because there's other people in the group thinking that way, but it's at some point a limited group of people thinking to even have anyone to fight over it. If everybody was thinking that way, it wouldn't be a fight. So the ever-present nature of an absolute source never has a fight in it. We never fight over it. We fight over the ideas we have about it. And I would say that's the same as the problems we have. The problem is never the problem until we see the problem we're making out of it and start to see how we're thinking of it that's really the problem. Most problems, if not all problems, when understood, have an absolute solution. It may not be discovered yet, but it's known to exist. If it can be created, if a problem can be created, it's within the confines of nature. And nature can provide for those problems. Very few of them have no solution. Sometimes takes us a while to figure out what they are, but largely it's for lack of understanding what the problem is, that the solution isn't created. When we understand the problem accurately, the solutions tend to come almost immediately. And I would suggest they're always available. We just don't understand them. So the seeing part of our experience is understanding. The visible seeing part is not making judgment on what we're doing. It's just seeing what we're seeing as what we're seeing. It's just observing.
That makes me feel that, oh, I'm sorry.
That knowing nature is also the observer of everything that we're doing. So you can make a conclusion, and I wouldn't say if you thought it was, you're admitting that what you're doing is wrong, but you're talking about it openly, which would be, to me, one of the premises of our discussion, which is when you allow something wrong to be wrong, it isn't a sticking point. You're just choosing to do it, which you have every right to do. Doesn't mean it's right to have the right to do it, but if it's wrong and wrong, there's no conflict there. It's when we think wrong is right that we get into this addictive, repetitious nature. And to a degree, you're thinking it's right because you're justifying it because the cause of what Amazon represents to you. So,
I don't actually, that was just the bullshit. I don't actually, I just.
But listen, the point is, it's easy to start to fill in the blanks to try to bring balance to stuff because we don't like being out of balance. Our bodies are designed to maintain homeostasis, which is a balance. And balance on a teeter-totter is the center point. The balance between good and bad is the point immediately in the middle that both good and bad share, where it's neutral. It isn't good or bad. It could be either. It's a choice.
Yeah.
That's something that all those things that we think of in terms of good and bad, right and wrong, share, is that equal point, that center point, that choice, that neutrality. There's no fight in neutrality. So it's just beginning. Yeah. It's beginning to introduce thought to this global sense of knowing that we already have, and it isn't even global. It's beyond globes and beyond spheres and beyond limits. Mm-hmm. To just introduce it and start to notice that if I'm basing my decisions on on thinking about myself, I'm basing decisions on a sense of fear because the fear created in making believe all I am is what I think naturally recognizes that there's more to what I am than what I'm thinking. So I am afraid to be doing the thing that insists on making believe all I am is what I think. It's a recognition of it. So the consequence is the immediacy of that awareness. And the consequence of thinking about myself is fear and doubt and calling things into question. Why would I call them into question if what I was doing wasn't questionable? Mm-hmm. Very hard to question truth is true. Actually, it's not hard. It just, you got to go a long way to simply dismiss something that basically confirms itself. And the irony of the infinite is the opposite of the infinite is infinite. Because it isn't in this relative thing. The opposite of good is bad, and the opposite of bad is good. It's the opposite of something infinite or absolute is exactly the same thing as it is, because there is no opposite in it.
Yeah. When you say that it's infinite and there's this absolute source, the true is, um, it's easier for me to kind of understand it as that well, if it's everything, then it's also nothing.
Yes.
And so that being said, there is no such thing as truth other than the truth that I'm willing to invest my whatever
Well,
in.
no, where it there is no truth within the confines of reason. And that's effectively what intuition is. Intuition is knowledge beyond reason. So to think of it only within spatial terms, like it's something or nothing, is to think of it only as something rather than as something that isn't something at all, but it's really something. It's
Yeah.
in its own vast, inexplicable, unformattable, uh, non-dimensional, non-time bound concept. It's an essence of an essence that can't be described. And even within the Jewish culture, they use the word Yahweh to refer to God as a reference to the fact that to try to name God would be to diminish God.
Yeah.
And so
So you're,
it's an awareness that the awareness can be subverted by our thinking, when in fact it can't really be subverted, but to the thinking we're doing, we can feel it's subverted and we can feel subversive. And as a result, feel as though we're at odds with everything and create an experience that obviously gives us impressions that simply aren't true and become depressing the longer we hang on to them.
yeah. No, and I get that. And it's just, I think it sounds like, we talk about these sort of cosmic ideas, but then
They're
in
here.
this, in the context of truth, yeah, but then it goes into, I think people, or at least me, when I think of truth, I think of like not so much this cosmic stuff, but more like, well, what if I want to get an abortion and my, and that's what's so scary about the times we're living in right now, is the idea that a state can determine the right and wrong for its people. And now it's like, well, wait, what is true? It's
But
scary. It's really
why is
scary.
that news to people? States were created to determine what's right and wrong for people from the beginning of states being created. Their whole point was to do for people what people seem unwilling to do for themselves, which is to bring some order to civility. And what do? Act out of order very often. And I'm not taking a position on abortion or any of that stuff. What I think is interesting about the abortion issue is that nobody's talking about how people can be. I know that most of the cases that people are really focusing on are people who have had incest and rape and other instances that weren't their choice. So they're now affected by a child or the potential of pregnancy by someone who actually either raped them or harmed them in some way that um, was not voluntarily on their part. And even if it was voluntary, they may be too young to face the consequences of it or want to face the consequences. But it's interesting that while that conversation rages, it doesn't seem to be a conversation about safer sex or sex that isn't going to create kids. Most of the abortions that I was involved in too, which I wasn't happy to be involved in, but the women made choices and had abortions. I saw that as an irresponsibility on my part for having gotten them pregnant. That discussion doesn't seem to happen simultaneous with the other discussion. Why is it that most abortions are not people who have been raped and have incest and all of those things that have happened to them? Most of
Yeah,
them are
but
girls that got pregnant that seemingly accidentally, but it isn't an accident when you're having sex. And the potential
that's
for
where
pregnancy is there, and you just think it's not going to happen because it's inconvenient to think it's not going to happen. And again, I'm not casting aspersions on people. I'm simply talking about the fact we don't talk openly about the entire issue, but seem to glom on to the one thing that can be most incendiary and then fight and 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 wonder why we're not focused on what we can do and constantly focused on things that we can't. We're creating an impossibility by creating a polarization that just keeps fighting. It's
Mhm.
not growing, it's not developing, it's just getting worse. And we're
Well,
proving how capable we are of that.
that's why I can't subscribe to an all-encompassing truth, because I can't. I have no
It's not a
idea what.
subscription, by the way.
Well, no, but it's like I have no conceivable idea what it's like to carry a child to term, to be pregnant, to undergo the experiences that men and women and individual people go through with various situations.
Yes.
are so, like I said, nuanced and specific, and I could never understand what it's like to be pregnant. So it's like it's not even in my right or power to even determine what an irresponsible or responsible decision is.
Well, no,
If I
stop for a
cannot,
second. Stop. My point is, if you're having sex and it's unprotected, there's a good chance somebody's going to get pregnant. And if it leads to abortion, the responsibility of that is coming from your choice. That's what I'm saying. That's all. It isn't to say that women shouldn't still have the right. I'm not arguing that at all. I'm saying that we speak in terms that are not broad enough to be responsible to look at the fact that many, 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 many abortions are had by people who have simply been irresponsible with their bodies. That's all. And
that's
I
the
don't
thing.
even know if it's irresponsible. They
Yeah,
just
I
chose
don't,
not to want the consequences.
but I think that is it. It's a little bit contradictory, because if true, if we're talking about an all-encompassing, infinite source, then when you start picking and choosing what's saying that, because we're only saying that the choice that that woman made is irresponsible in the context of various biases and other
I would say
things.
it's the man's choice. I would say it's the man's choice because the man is the fertile. Man is creating the fulfilling that potential. The woman, no woman ever got pregnant on her own without some contribution from a man. So I would backtrack to the man being the actual chooser. The man has control over that, or a lack of it.
Like when you mentioned like something was an irresponsible choice, it's like even putting irresponsible or responsible, like that's a made up label to me. Yes. And it's like, to me, is like a choice is just a choice. It's a, because I might define it as
why would abortion be so critical if people didn't want to reverse a choice? It would obviously be something. And I'm, again, not talking about in those instances that transcends the simple act of sex turning into a pregnancy somebody doesn't want. So the point is that if what I'm trying to do is undo what I did, obviously there's some component of irresponsibility in what I did.
No, but what I'm saying is that, no, but I get what you're saying, but I don't even think it's something that we could even conceive, because it's not about that they're.
And why are we talking about it?
Well, because I think it's a great example of this. Like we talk about it, absolute truth and things, but I think we need to talk about these sort of difficult subjects because because I think that actually, because honestly, at the end of the day,
so we're talking about it.
There's an absolute truth.
Austin, we're talking about it. And my point is that we're not responsible in our conversation to overlook the irresponsibility of a man impregnating a woman who doesn't want to get pregnant and not noticing.
Who says that's irresponsible?
I would say if people want to reverse it and find out that the consequence is something that's wholly unacceptable to them, to want to reverse it in whatever mechanical way is possible, I would say that's, it's like liposuction. It's something people do as a consequence of having a body that they think should be changed. If they have been responsible for that body and what that body contains is something they want to get rid of, there are probably ways to do that may not require something as invasive as surgery, like eating more vegetables. And again, I'm not taking a position on this. I'm simply
suggesting I think
within the confines of our contempt is a lack of responsibility to notice the totality of what we are doing to cause the problem that we claim to be so hell-bent over solving in one small way. And there again is a division of thought coming to the rescue of more thought,
But all this, okay. But before I lose this, all I'm trying to say is that I'm assuming it is within logic. It is not unreasonable to assume. Well, you want an abortion is a reversal of a choice, so that you don't have to live with the consequences. That by logic that makes sense. But because I could never even begin to conceive what it would even be like to go through what that person is and is either avoiding going through, I have to kind of chalk it up to, well, that's their choice. And I am in no place to determine that what they did to get to that choice is irresponsible or responsible. It just is what it is, and it's not my place to even determine or place some sort of
But
like
it's
good
interesting.
or
It's interesting, though, Austin, being a male, that would be the one that actually is the determining factor in that pregnancy, that you would think you have no choice and no involvement in that. And that, I say, would be a little more primary than coming up with a greater abstract consequence of trying to make believe that because you're not a woman, you can't conceive of what it is to be a man and the part you might play.
Yeah, but no, that's not true, because I don't believe that's true, because there's the saying, a man becomes a father when the baby's born, and a woman becomes a mother when she gets pregnant. And while you're right,
But
like
that's
a
not
man
true, because it's only the woman is aware of it because she's housing it, and the
but
man becomes aware of it because he finally sees it outside. The
yeah,
woman is
but there's
clearly aware of it, but the man is
but there's
obviously a father.
but no, but the what that saying means is that there is so much that woman goes through that the man doesn't have to go through. I would argue that there's more responsibility on the woman. Like, the man doesn't have to deal with all the crazy cravings and the hormones, and he doesn't have to have a child that he has to carry. He doesn't have to deal with all
But
the.
why would we? Why would we talk about it in ways to excuse the part we do play, in the name of pretending that because we don't play the other part, we should not have anything to do with it?
What do you mean?
What I mean is that what I'm talking about is my experience. I was responsible for what led to that. I was the impregnator. The woman didn't get pregnant on her own. I instigated it in some way, participated in it, and caused it. She was receptive to it, but I was the initiator of it as far as I'm concerned. I am the responsible party. The point is that we talk about it in terms of rights, but don't talk about it responsibly enough to begin to limit the consequence that seems to be so much of a right to do. But why not talk about why not talk about just not doing it? Just like with AIDS, when AIDS started. You know what it would have solved it? Not continuing to have risky sex. You know what spread it? Continuing to have risky sex. People knew what was going on and they continued to choose to have risky sex. We think because it doesn't happen, it's impossible to ever expect everyone to do anything responsibly, because we have been thinking so irresponsibly for so long that we believe that all the divisive ways we've come up to concoct what we think truth and reality is are actually true and real, when they're all largely justifications for our own inability to act responsibly.
But see,
I would say that's a conversation that impacts every decision we make, including the decision we make to allow people to get so crazy that they end up killing other people and not notice that something's wrong in advance and pretend everything's fine because it's good in my life.
I agree, but I think you're contradicting yourself, because
I'm sure.
And we talk about this all the time about arbitrary labels and titles. And I think, like, you are stating that why couldn't they do this because it was responsible or irresponsible?
I'm not talking about anything that could have been done. I am talking right now about we are doing in a conversation to avoid the responsibility we can even discuss by coming up with all sorts of theoretical ways to pretend that because we're not women, we can't even conceive of it and can't even talk about it. But we could certainly conceive of our own responsibility and talk about that.
No, but true is true. But yes, the responsibility that you talk about is not true. It's still your perceived idea of what responsibility is. Is it not? I feel like what you're saying is somewhat of a contradictory, because you're talking about responsibility as if it's like a, yeah.
Here's the question. Does it lead to a fight or peace? Does the idea lead to a fight or peace? Does the idea of responsibility lead to a fight or peace? And I would say that if we're actually talking about responsibility as responsibility, there's no fight in it, because the responsibility begins to get clear and what we can do becomes obvious, rather than what may or may not be happening seems to constantly drive the issues as seeming so inobvious and oblivious to our experience.
And by that logic, because I don't want, of course, it's like we're talking about it and now we're getting into abortion stuff, but it's like, by that logic, is like, oh, the decision to have an abortion is irresponsible because it doesn't lead to peace, but maybe in a certain circumstance, maybe at that time that woman was doing the responsible thing because the abortion led to peace.
You're going back in time to talk about somebody who isn't here to come up with some kind of logic to justify why it could be right and real when the fact is that the situation as it is here right now.
No, I'm just saying that there's no such, I'm just saying that the ideas of responsibility and irresponsibility are as arbitrary as and no, as much of a lie. I think they're not.
You know what real. Responsibility is? Responsible. You know what irresponsibility is? Irresponsible. You know what reactiveness is? Irresponsible, defensive, defiant, denial, trying to make believe that what we think is true and real. What is response-able is considered, something contemplated, something thought about. Doesn't mean that it's always going to be response-able, but it means that the potential for a decision to be made that is responsible can be made. And what is responsible? Something that benefits everyone. What's applicable in this conversation is whether or not it works. Does
something responsible does not always benefit everyone.
Okay. How's that?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into the contentious abortion example, but I mean, there's tons of examples of things that are responsible actions that don't always benefit everyone. But those are these kinds of we'll argue them to the end of time,
Austin, if you're arguing them, the chances are you're not considering responsibility, you're considering it some form of responsibility that isn't responsible.
I think there's a difference between, I think you're confusing argument and the conversation to sort of get to a higher plane of thought.
Okay.
Because I'm
capable of
perceive that. Yeah. Because I feel like you could perceive what we're doing as arguing. I think arguing has been kind of muddled down into this sort of disagreeable yelling, but I think arguments used to be, debate. It used to be when people argued, it was there was something that came out of it that was positive. And now it's just kind of like banter.
I don't know. I mean, I would say it's a fight. An argument would be a fight. A conversation is conversing. Conversing would be to present different verses, opposed perhaps in thought, but no more than thought makes of them. You made the statement that the state has no right to do this or that. The states were created to give them the right to do those things. I'm not taking a position on whether what they do is right or wrong. I'm telling you that as a result of the dysfunctional nature of our human experience, we have created governments and authorities to make those decisions for us because we don't seem to be capable enough on an individual basis to act as a collective in any kind of uniform way that's productive enough to not need that kind of oversight. That's what
I know some that would disagree with that. I feel
Austin, there's billions that will disagree with everything.
Exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I have no problem. I'm not looking for agreement.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not looking for agreement. I'm not looking to prevail. I'm not looking to come to a conclusion. I'm looking to simply permit the concept and apply the concept that if there is anything absolute, and it's absolute, then it is everything that we're experiencing right now and making a mess out of by making believe that what is really happening is all we're thinking. And if you look at thinking, you're going to find all kinds of exceptions, all kinds of rationalizations, all kinds of justifications, all kinds of stories, all kinds of cultures, all kinds of reasons for truth not to be true. But it's pretty interesting to even consider seriously that truth could not be true and not see that even the launch in a direction of trying to disprove that is a fight, is an idea that truth doesn't even exist. Now, maybe it doesn't exist, but I would say, why do we struggle? Why do we have depression? Why do we have anxiety? Why do we have stress? Why do we dysfunction? Why do we doubt ourselves if doubt is the nature of our existence? Why would that not be fulfilling for us and feel like the ultimate expression of our capacity and give us incredible prowess? It does not seem to. And the world does not seem to be suffering from truth, but lies and doubt and uncertainty and insecurity and conflict and all those things. So the point of a discussion about responsibility isn't to say that anybody's actually acting responsible in every way, but that our nature is responsible. And we know when we don't act responsible that something's wrong. And why would we feel wrong so much? Why would we feel we need to feel better so much? Why would we feel negative thoughts are plaguing us so much? Why would we feel that our brains are attacking us? Why would we feel other people make us susceptible and hurt our feelings if it weren't for something we were doing so consistently and persistently to consider that truth, which isn't true? It's just a culmination of thoughts concluding truth, which isn't true at all. Because when it's my truth and it's not your truth, how can it be true? How can truth be part-time for some and not all? And I'm suggesting if we consider the concept, the applicable nature of it will become obvious by bringing some light to those dark, shadowy corners of obstructions we've created in thought that cause those haunting impressions that we suffer and think it's as a result of what everybody else is doing, like the state and the Supreme Court and all of the people that we've authorized to do those things, and then scream about it when they don't do what we think is right. We've given them that authority. You and I have participated in a system that has given them that authority to make those decisions. And if we don't like those decisions, there's something about what we're doing we don't like. And I would say there's a lot there to talk about, not from a point of view of what's wrong with them, but what's wrong with us in the allowance of that to happen. If my influence is so small and so narrow and so limited as to allow those things to happen that I can feel are abhorrent and impossible to understand, then I am not doing much to affect anything but the problem I'm seeing and causing.
And you don't think that the conflict comes from people trying to find truth in where there's not truth?
Truth is everywhere. It can't be found. It can't be lost. It's beginning to concede that it's the nature of existence and the essence of life. It isn't a debatable quotient. We can debate it. Shakespeare said, love is an ever fixed mark. When altereth it finds, meaning when change happens, it does not change. This concept has been discussed forever, and then it's been latched onto for the most part by something that's commercially viable that can be then used to create organizations, rather than notice that we're already organized around this natural, unifying field of life and love and energy, whatever it is, and not define it. Just to begin to realize it is what it is. If it is what it is, it doesn't take a lot more definition than that to concede it and start to have a stable basis. And if that application works, just like applying principles in math makes the problems work all of a sudden, it's not because we're applying the principles, it's because the principles have always been inherent to the problem. And if the problems we're seeing, we're dissecting in all these various ways to give ourselves the impression that it's up to us, we're just continuing to maintain that same sick thinking that has gone on through human history to think that it's up to us to get to a place we are already in right now. Always have been, always will. You can't find where you are if you think you're not there. You're going to search everywhere and maybe eventually realize that where you started was exactly where you were attempting to end up. But if you're there, you never have to end up there. You're just there. We're here now. If that's true, if that's real, it might be worth considering, not as something to buy, not as something I'm selling. Something I'm suggesting is worth considering, and considering is an awakened meditation. It's a chance to just simply allow a thought to exist without contest and dismissing it out of some righteous proof that we have that it can't be possible because it seems impossible.
Well, I think the argument of multiple truths is not like in Buddhism, there's the two truths doctrine, and there's the idea of a provisional and conventional truth, which describes daily experiences of a concrete world. And then there's the idea of ultimate truth, which is, the ultimate reality, concrete.
Yes, we can have what we call our own truths, but they're not true. They're just self-serving conclusions. And there isn't a problem with self-serving conclusions until we think that they're true.
You don't think both can exist simultaneously?
They do exist simultaneously. We're doing it right now.
But you're assuming that they two can exist, but ultimately only one truly does exist, and the other is an illusion.
Yes, exactly.
You don't think
self-created? If I make believe that chocolate is my favorite flavor, that doesn't become true for everyone. That if truth isn't true for all, it isn't true.
But okay, and stop right there is exactly what I was talking about with your envision of what is responsible, and what you were saying with certain specific situations of responsibility and irresponsibility is the same exact thing as what you just said about chocolate, because what you feel is responsible is not responsible for everyone.
Yes. And where
that's all I was trying to say.
Okay, well, what I'm talking about in absolute terms is responsibility for everyone. And what that would be in my terms is to recognize that if we already have a knowing nature, sitting around and debating what that knowing nature is irrelevant to that knowing nature. And sitting around and thinking I need to come up with all the same thoughts everyone else has is irrelevant to the fact that if they know already, they know what right and wrong is. They know what responsible and irresponsible is, because irresponsibility never creates a product that's beneficial for everyone. And responsibility always creates a product that expresses it, like nature's responsible. Let's look at nature. We don't find irresponsibility in nature. We constantly find nature whenever we look at it.
But those concepts don't even exist in nature.
Thank you.
There's no such thing as that.
Thank you. There's no argument, is there? And this surrounds us, and yet we think it's debatable. And we don't see that it's the thinking that's given us the freedom to think anything we want that we're debating. It isn't the nature. It isn't the universe. It isn't the world. It isn't the people. It's our own thinking that we're debating. And it's a sickness. It's an illness to make believe that what I think is truth and reality, because I believe then that I'm opposed by all other things that may be truth and real, true and real. And I would say that's a sickness. That's a diminishment of capacity. That's a depreciation of appreciable action. Why do we always make grateful lists? Because we're not grateful for the things we do that are irresponsible. We're not grateful. We shouldn't be grateful necessarily for those things. We can be, to the degree that we learn from them, but to worship them as being something we need to be grateful for because they're wrong and we're trying to make them into right is just another way of being sick and trying to claim that what we don't want is what we want all of a sudden.
I guess what I was trying to say is that this conversation has not, where I feel like you and I are in two different schools of thought, where you are becoming more grounded from this conversation, and I'm becoming more, not more flexible, but like I feel like truth and having a better relationship to truth is not about determinations. It's about removing of blind spots.
Yes, it's about undoing
rather
than more doing.
The conflict comes in this sort of idea of like, it is this, and it's more easy to digest when I think of it as, well, it's definitely not this. And my whole life just taking off those blinders. But there is scientific studies, and I'll find it for our next conversation, where the people can perceive two different things totally differently, but they're both real to them. And
yes,
that has been proven,
Austin, people can think they're not who they are too. People can think what they're doing isn't what they're doing. People can think what's happening isn't happening. Those are all possible. That doesn't make them true, and it doesn't make them real. And I'm not arguing in favor of truth and reality, and I'm not arguing that you should see my truth as I see it and talk about it. That is not what I'm here to do. Mm-hmm. I'm simply suggesting that if there is anything true, it is simply true. In all ways, in all respects, and the laws of the universe that even humans haven't quite figured out, but haven't changed as long as they've been looking at them in ways that are different. What's changed is the way they've looked at them and thought of them. The laws of nature haven't changed. They haven't evolved. They do exactly what they've been doing as long as they've been doing it. And if there's been any evolution, it's an evolution that's based on exactly what they were doing when they were doing it, and now they're doing what they're doing. Same with nature. The laws of nature are not varying. They're not remaking themselves. They're not thinking about themselves. They're simply expressing a knowingness that knows exactly what to do, and they do that thing. And when it comes time to disintegrate, they disintegrate. And what does the disintegration do? Leaves fertile ground for the next generation of those things. And we are not providing that fertile ground. We are providing ground that is contaminated for the next generation. And the next generation is breaking down around the weight of their own awareness of what we have been preparing for them and saying the children are our future, when in fact the adults have been acting irresponsibly for centuries.
Yeah.
And because there was so much generosity and abundance to squander and think that we weren't doing anything, we think that's still the best method, is to not look at it accurately and make believe that somehow or another it'll get better the longer we ignore it, because we create some new way to distract ourselves from it. And I would say that's simply not true. And it's divisive. And it's a clever ruse that isn't that clever, because the consequences that we thought were not happening have been happening sufficiently over the decades to build up to the points now where we're witnessing those consequences in a force that's starting to be seemingly difficult to imagine. And yet we've been imagining the whole time that denial was the best route, or for a long time. And not everyone, but enough that it's happening. If it's happening, the sum total of all that we've been doing and all I'm responsible for has led to this.
Yeah. Well, what you're describing about, the system of nature and things that things do, that they know that that's what they're there to do, and then they die and they give to the future, the next thing. That just seems like something that's in the past. I feel like we're condemning this sort of cognitive dissonance that, of course it's overwhelming for some people to have their own truth, that they can believe what they want, and then the absolute truth. But I think it's actually a gift. And I think that it's what makes being a human being special and unique from the rest of, like, the fact, like, for example, my love for arbitrary things, for I think, like, I collect records, objectively it's the dumbest, most inconvenient, talk about an irresponsible hobby. I mean, I'm collecting sheets of cardboard with acrylic vinyl inside of them, and taking up so much space. It's such an irresponsible hobby, and I can use that space for better.
Austin, it's interesting that all of a sudden everything we do seems to become something we shouldn't be doing, simply to talk about something as being true and real. And the fact is that it is the power and capacity of that truth and reality that allows us to make all those choices we make, all of them, in a way that actually will probably reflect a better result and consequence than the ones we often create by attaching to those things as thinking those things are going to fulfill us in some way that we feel we're not fulfilled.
Exactly. That is the point I'm making. That is why, like, and I feel like the subjective truths, I can believe all I want, and to say that they have no bearing in real life, I think is like,
well, I would say they have no bearing in real life, but they have a great bearing in the life you think is yours.
Right. I agree.
And as a result, everyone around you.
But I think the conflict comes from these conversations, is that the fact of the matter, though, is, and why it's so crazy and so scary, is that these subjective truths and these sorts of ideas that we have real world effects. And that is why I think that while there is this absolute truth that is all encompassing, and we can have these subjective truths all we want, but it doesn't really make a difference, is, I think the fact of the matter is that subjective truths are just as much as a part of the, whatever you want to call it. But I think the problem
you're really not talking about, you're talking about subjective truths as though they're my truths. What you're really talking about is choices, and the consequences of choices, and the effect of choices. And what choices tend to affect is everything everywhere. That's it. Mm-hmm. So it shows the unanimous and anonymous nature of our existence in affecting everything we don't even see and we can't even calculate is out there. Every person and everything every choice that's made has an effect that causes an effect on everything else. And I would say, again, it reveals the unity that we share. And we can think, because somebody doesn't know who we are, that we're not affecting them, but we can think we don't even exist or shouldn't exist too. And while we're existing, so we can think all sorts of absurd thoughts and diminish the actuality of what we're doing. And all we're doing is making choices and thoughts that we like and want to choose. And we blame reality when we don't particularly like the consequences of them, and think of them as something that's ours to distinguish us, and then wonder why we feel alone. So our choice of words is interesting, that we would need to elevate something that we are free to do, which is think. This isn't about not thinking. It's about noticing that when we're thinking obsessively, all we're doing is thinking about our thinking, and it's a drowning pool of stagnation that creates a toxicity in our systems, just like not feeding new water into a pond would make it poison if you drank the water. It doesn't have an opinion about you. It's not saying, let me fuck with this guy who's going to come and drink the water. It just does that because that's how it's designed. If it's not renewed, it isn't refreshed. And the newness of our renewal is the presence of every moment, providing every opportunity for us to do whatever we want. So what that means is that every moment we're choosing from the pool of possibilities. And if the possibilities we think are the only possibilities are limited to only what we're thinking, we are missing the majority of the opportunity we have, and wonder why we're feeling starved for opportunity.
That is why I think that us, like humans, have already entered that sort of next stage of evolution, is because we can take arbitrary things, arbitrary moments, totally meaningless things, that we put meaning into them to the degree that it actually hurts us.
Yes.
And then we wonder why. So, to try to relate
reality, though.
It doesn't. But
it affects our experience. But reality stays the same in terms of the beauty of the concept that we're talking about is that the reality always allows us to recognize anything we're doing that isn't helpful, that isn't useful. What isn't helpful is unuseful. It's not useful. And what's useful is typically helpful. It benefits everyone. And if that division is seen in the choices we make, there's no reason to keep choosing the wrong choice, except to the insanity of the thinking the only thing we can do is keep doing the thing we've been doing because someday we think it'll be right when it's never been right. The only thing that causes this internal conflict of thought is that we're thinking a wrong thought is right. We can think wrong thought, like you were talking earlier. You do something wrong and you admit it's wrong. It doesn't have any lasting effect on you now. It may be something you choose not to do in the future because you realize there is some effect to it, but it doesn't create that internal conflict that mentally obsessive thought does when I think what's wrong is right, and now I'm defending it. And I would suggest, Austin, to some degree, what you're doing, you do think is right, even though you admit it's wrong. You admit it's wrong in some segment of what you're doing, but think it's right in some other segment of what you're doing. And I would say that leads to conflicted thoughts. And it isn't, that isn't even conflicted until you start thinking one or the other should be the absolute truth, and start to consider that what you're doing is wrong because you're not doing what you're doing. If we're simply doing what we're doing and start to concede we're doing what we're doing, it's a lot easier to live with and make better decisions than when we're thinking what we're doing is the thing we shouldn't be doing, and live in this interminable conflict and think that based on that conflict, we're going to make any good decisions that aren't going to reflect that conflict.
Yeah. I just think that you can enjoy the fruits of both. So both of like your thoughts, you can, it's like, this is why my mantra is always like telling myself, it's not that deep. It's not that deep. Sometimes I just, if something, we can choose to do things and it doesn't have to be, we just for the sake of enjoyment of those things. And it can.
The sickness of addiction is to think the things we're doing are enjoyable while they're killing us in terms of our physical experience. And that's the problem. We make believe that we should be enjoying it when in fact they're not healthy for us and they're not good for us or anyone else, because they don't promote survival. They're a death wish. And that's the clarity of the contemplation that we're talking about. Seeing this clearly doesn't mean avoiding what's happening. It means looking at it clearly. And if what's happening is disturbing and we're not disturbing, that's a psychopathic approach to our witness. That's pretending that what's happening isn't happening. And that's basically my experience, how I lived most of my life. And many of the people around me make believe that because it was better for me, I was better off. And not see that the totality of what's being witnessed by everything that's happening is a witness for what I am a part of directly and absolutely in every respect. And I don't have to bear that as though that it's some unbearable weight, because I know if that truth is true, everyone else shares that too. And I too with them bear that burden equally. And there's a lot of us that could have a great impact if we actually thought in ways that were accurate enough to begin to express things in ways that were accurate and applicable enough to make progress in directions that was actual progress, rather than just progressing and making things worse and saying that somehow one day it'll get better.
Mhm.
This
I'm just,
addiction,
I'm just talking about the balance of the two. Like enjoy
there is
the
no
things you do.
imbalance in them, though, except the one we make. There is no
Yeah,
imbalance.
exactly.
There's no imbalance. So beginning to contemplate the stability of the absolute nature begins to reckon with the fact that teeter-totters never teeter and totter if they're not on solid ground. That the teetering and tottering is the weight we put on each side, that we give, the resistance we have to what we're doing, the resistance to have to how we see things, that creates the pressure, that creates the imbalance that we constantly feel we need to struggle to rebalance. Well, I don't know that we constantly do, but there seems to be a pretty strong potential for that kind of thinking to be going on. The rationalization that goes into trying to bring balance back to people's experience. How do I feel better about something that I know is bad? Well, I feel better about it if you're just having it and say, wow, if it's bad, maybe what it's telling me is something would be worth learning and admitting, rather than continuing to make believe that all I want to do is feel good and deny the wrong I'm doing and not learn from the wrong and constantly think that what I need is more of the right. That's a picture perfect definition of addiction. More and more and more and more is never enough when I'm doing it, because I'm not treating the problem, I'm treating the symptom. I'm trying to feel better about what's worse rather than acknowledge, oh, what's worse is good information. I don't tend to put my hand in fire many times to prove that it's going to burn. I know it's going to burn, so I don't tend to do it. But I can put my hand into the fire of my own thinking and make believe, because it isn't burning immediately, that I don't feel it immediately because I've grown so numb to what I'm experiencing, and think that numbness is my goal, to become calloused and distant and insulated from what is happening. I can entertain thoughts for quite some time before I realize they're problems, but I will create the problems to manifest the experience I need to see them outside of me, because I'm unwilling to actually simply concede what I'm doing inside of me, because I've become numb to the idea that I have anything to do with it.
I agree.
That I would say is a sickness, and talking about it isn't easy, Austin, because it actually begins to have those little reactive tendencies that we think are hidden pop up and start fighting for their life, because we think we depend on that defense to maintain the livelihood we have, when the only thing we're thinking about is a life that has no life. It's just a thought it's a thought about a thought, thinking of itself, thinking the self it's thinking of is alive. It doesn't even have to think it can die, and that we're afraid of it dying gives it more credit than is due, because it never had any life to die from. It's just simply a thought we're unwilling to let go of.
I think that's a good note to end on. I have to get into work soon.
I love you. I appreciate this. Your insight is great. You are a good challenge in terms of a conversation, because you're looking at things, and you remind me a lot of what I did by driving people nuts when I was younger, trying to sort it all out. And, I hope you're able to accomplish that. And I hope together we're able to see things in ways that are clear, so that our discussion everywhere we go can carry a conversation that gives insight and hope and an eye-opening experience to people that's meaningful enough to have meaning, rather than simply create meaning to justify doing things that have no meaning, or at least provide the freedom of that ultimate sensation that is, I would say, peace and love and stability that naturally comes when we're not busy obstructing it with a preoccupation and thought that isn't peaceful or happy or fulfilling.
Yeah, that's all. I think that the opportunity to make up stories is just an invitation for us to participate and give meaning to something where there isn't, at least for us.
Very good.
Very good. And it's like we shouldn't negate that. We should enjoy that and participate in that. But obviously, when we do it too much, it gets to a degree where we're actually conflicting with truth itself, and then we wonder how do we get here? When you know what I'm saying. So I just think that there is just a balance between the two, and it's part of being a human. It's the privilege of being a human that allows us to sort of make up stuff to give us enjoyment and meaning in life. when.
And this is about that more than you may be imagining when you think the challenge is trying to eliminate it. The only elimination in looking at it is the challenge to the thinking we're doing that isn't well and it isn't healthy, and it's expressing itself in ways that are literally threatening our physical existence, everyone else's too. And you're seeing these random acts of violence and all this kind of stuff popping up. It's not a coincidence. It's a consequence of a mistaken identity and thought that has been treated in ways that haven't helped, because it's getting worse. You know, when I was a kid, every story told seemed to have a moral. The moral of the story, they used to say. And you know why they told the story? Yeah.
Like Aesop's fables, you know.
Yeah, and they were created to point to aspects of life that were worth considering, that were moralistic, that included other people. They were inclusive rather than exclusive. And the stories that I'm talking about are the ones that we use to excuse ourselves from the table, excuse ourselves from life. We're asking to be non-existent in relation to what's happening through the story we're using to say that we wouldn't be where we were if this, that, or them hadn't happened that way. And you know what? Everything happens exactly the way it happens all the time. So to try to pretend that it's some other way is to try to pretend that we're not where we are. And that's a pretty big leap to take, to make believe thinking is going to keep me from being where I am. So being here with you is a chance to talk about that. And I appreciate these opportunities. My experience is it's helped me to get better, and also helped me to recognize the anxiety and the stress and the vulnerability I have, and the ideas that I don't have the capacity to share well enough to make them clear enough to be heard. And I would say that's a failing of my own lack of growth. And I appreciate the opportunity that I have with you to, and with everyone else to hone that skill. My sense is communication is one of the basic things that humans do that is different than all the other animals, and to the degree that we do it, and the fact that we've developed it so much, and yet the development of it has actually led to bigger problems, is an indication that what we may be doing with it isn't as well developed as we could develop it. So love you, brother.
You too, man.
See you around campus.
Okay.